Imagine being dragged into a dark stone chamber. The air is thick with the smell of damp wood, iron, and old blood. A hooded man approaches, holding tools that look more like instruments of hell than anything made by human hands. Your fate? To face a device designed not just to kill, but to stretch suffering into something beyond imagination. Throughout history, torture devices were more than just punishments. They were symbols of power, control, and fear. Monarchs, inquisitors, and executioners used them to break not only bodies, but also spirits. And some of these devices were so cruel, so ingeniously wicked, that they continue to haunt us centuries later. But how did such instruments come into existence? Were they truly about justice, or were they dark performances meant to terrify anyone who even thought about disobedience? Tonight, we dive into the shadows of human history and uncover the most brutal torture devices ever created. The Middle Ages were notorious for inventing machines of pain. One of the most feared was the Iron Maiden. Imagine a coffin made of metal, standing upright, but lined on the inside with sharp spikes. When the victim was placed inside and the doors shut, those spikes pierced flesh, but not in ways quick enough to cause death. Instead, they punctured vital areas slowly, ensuring the victim bled, suffered, and suffocated over hours, sometimes days. Many historians debate whether the Iron Maiden was ever widely used, or whether it was more legend than reality, but the image itself has cemented its place as one of the ultimate symbols of cruelty. If the Iron Maiden was about enclosing pain, another infamous device was about stretching the human body beyond its limits. The rack. A large wooden frame with rollers at each end. Ropes were tied to the prisoner's hands and feet. With each turn of the roller, limbs were stretched tighter, tendons tearing, joints dislocating, bones breaking. It wasn't always meant to kill sometimes. Victims were left alive, permanently crippled, as living warnings to others. Famous figures like Guy Fawkes, the man behind the gunpowder plot, are believed to have suffered on the rack before execution. Can you imagine being in a world where hearing the creak of wooden rollers was enough to send shivers through an entire village? But physical destruction wasn't the only weapon. Psychological horror played a part too. Take the scavenger's daughter. Unlike the rack, which pulled limbs apart, this cruel device did the opposite. It crushed the body inward. The prisoner was forced into a crouching position, metal bars pressing shoulders to knees, squeezing the chest until breathing became a desperate struggle. A slow collapse inward until bones cracked under pressure. The creativity of cruelty didn't stop there. In Spain, during the Inquisition, there was the Judas cradle. Victims were hoisted above a pyramid-shaped seat, its point sharp enough to pierce flesh. They were lowered, slowly, onto the tip, with their full body weight pressing downward. Days of agony followed, as infection, blood loss, and humiliation destroyed the victim piece by piece. This wasn't just about torture. It was a theatrical performance of dominance, meant to humiliate the condemned in the eyes of all who watched. And then there was the pear of anguish. A small metal device, shaped like a pear, inserted into the mouth or in far worse places. Once inside, a screw mechanism expanded it, tearing tissues apart. Used on women accused of witchcraft, thieves, or even those suspected of homosexuality, the pear was both intimate and grotesque, a violation of human dignity at its core. History's cruelty didn't end in Europe. In ancient China, the method of lingqi, often called death by 1,000 cuts, was used for centuries. Prisoners were tied to a wooden frame, and executioners sliced away at the flesh, piece by piece. The goal wasn't a swift death, but prolonged suffering, a punishment so infamous that it became a symbol of ultimate torment in Chinese literature. Meanwhile, in ancient Rome, crucifixion was perhaps the most well-known torture and execution method. Victims were nailed or tied to wooden crosses, left hanging under the sun, struggling for breath as their own body weight crushed their lungs. It was slow, excruciating, in public a clear message to anyone daring to defy Rome's authority. But what about devices that blended torture with bizarre spectacle? The Brazen Bull from ancient Greece stands out. Crafted as a hollow brass statue shaped like a bull, victims were locked inside. A fire lit beneath, heated the metal, roasting the person alive. To make it even more horrific, the bull was designed with a system of pipes so the victim's screams would echo out as the sound of a bellowing bull. It wasn't just execution. It was theater. Think about this. What kind of mind invents something that transforms human suffering into performance? Do you believe these devices were tools of justice or proof of how far human imagination can sink when driven by power? As centuries passed, some of these tortures became less about law and more about fear. In medieval towns, executioners displayed devices in public squares. People gathered to watch punishments, both horrified and entertained, much like crowds today watch violent films. Pain became a spectacle. Suffering was transformed into power. Even water, one of the most basic elements of life, became a tool of torment. During the Inquisition, water torture methods included forced ingestion, where victims were made to drink until their stomachs were near bursting, or waterboarding, simulating drowning again and again. What makes this form of torture particularly chilling is how it survives in modern times, used even in the 21st century. And then there were devices so strange they seem almost unbelievable. The breaking wheel, a large wagon wheel used across Europe. Victims were tied across its spokes, and executioners smashed their limbs with iron bars, weaving broken arms and legs through the gaps. Sometimes they were left on display, their shattered bodies twisted into the wheel as a warning. The heretic's fork was another invention, just a small metal rod with two sharp ends. It was strapped between the victim's chin and chest, or chin and throat, keeping the head upright. If the victim fell asleep or moved, the spikes pierced deeper, not designed to kill quickly, but to create constant, exhausting fear of one's own movement. The list of these inventions feels endless. The thumbscrew, crushing fingers joint by joint. The chair of torture, lined with spikes that pressed into the flesh. The coffin torture, where victims were locked inside cages shaped like human bodies, left hanging in public to be torn apart by animals in time. Each one, in its own way, tells us less about the guilt of the prisoner and more about the darkness of the society that created it. And yet, as horrifying as these stories are, they leave us with an uncomfortable truth. Torture devices were never just about punishment. They were about power. They were about making sure no one dared to challenge authority. They were about fear being stronger than justice. Today, most of these devices sit behind glass in museums. Tourists gawk, historians debate, and filmmakers dramatize. But behind the rusted iron and broken wood lies a chilling reminder of what humans are capable of when cruelty is given structure, when suffering is turned into spectacle. So, the question remains, have we truly moved beyond such horrors? Or have we only disguised them in modern, quieter forms? Because if history has shown us anything, it's that when power is unchecked, pain often becomes its sharpest weapon. What do you think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more.